There have been hundreds of books written about Ronald Reagan, and this is a question that always irritates an author. Why do we need another one? Well, you don't have to get very far into Craig Shirley's new book about Reagan to know that, yes, there was still a lot we didn't know about Reagan and how he came to the White House. Craig Shirley is with us here. His book is Rendezvous with Destiny. This is your second book about Ronald Reagan. How long did it take you to put this together?
Almost 4 years.
Almost four years.
I turned the manuscript in January, and it was actually 1,700 pages, so 1,000 pages were edited out. So about 1 year of my life of writing went into the ether.
What did you turn up that surprised you? I mean, there's a number, and your publicity people have sent out a whole page of little nuggets here that are in this book. What do you think is the biggest thing that we didn't know about this?
Bob, I think the biggest thing was that how much the Republican Party establishment was opposed to Reagan's nomination in 1980. They favored Howard Baker, they favored George Bush, they favored John Connally, but not Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan had taken on the establishment of the Republican Party starting in 1977, and he talked about a new Republican Party that could not be the party of the corporate boardroom, could not be the party of the country club. It had to be the party of the man on the street, the cop on the street, the homemaker, the entrepreneur, but it had to be the party of the individual. He was a populist conservative, and that was a threat to the established Republican order, and they set out to stop his candidacy very early on. As you recall, going after the age issue, which was shot through every story in 1979 into early 1980, that Reagan was just too old to be president of the United States.
Well, he almost got the nomination. He almost wrested it from Gerald Ford in '76. He came within just a handful of votes of getting the
59
nomination.
delegate votes, that's right.
And that's when the establishment really got upset with him, because a lot of them felt that had he not made that, made that run, that Gerald Ford would have beaten Jimmy Carter.
Gerald Ford went to his deathbed convinced that Ronald Reagan cost him the election. But Dick Cheney, who was then Gerald Ford's chief of staff, would tell you that Reagan actually helped Ford become a better candidate and got their flaccid campaign operation into shape so that they were able to take on Jimmy Carter and actually make a race of it.
One of my favorite parts of the book is the 1980 convention, where Henry Kissinger turned out to be kind of the mastermind behind it. They tried to get the vice presidential slot for Gerald Ford, of all people, and Ford, of course, wanted to be sort of a prime minister, basically wanted to be what Dick Cheney became during the Bush administration. I'll never forget the exclusive interview that he gave to Walter Cronkite during that convention. It brought the whole convention to a dead stop. I'm told Nancy Reagan saw that and said, this is never going to happen. But what an interesting story. You have a lot of details on how that all happened.
It was an absolutely fascinating day because it goes, it was completely unscripted. They had to throw the script away for the day because you had this, what the chapter I call is Motown Madness, because it was this day of network reporters interviewing delegates and rumors being reported on network television that then were carried back to the delegates, and it just swirled out of control, so that everybody was convinced there would be a Treaty of Detroit, a co-presidency, that they would appear as a joint ticket that night before the convention. And actually it came fairly close to Gerald Ford actually going on the ticket with Ronald Reagan. A lot of people think that Reagan pulled the plug on it, but in fact it was Gerald Ford who finally pulled the plug on the whole deal.
And sitting there watching it all on television was George Bush. They had already packed their bags, they paid their hotel bills, and were ready to leave, and then the next thing you know, Reagan calls him and says, will you do it?
Gets a phone call out of the blue. He's absolutely flabbergasted, and as you recall, there was a lot of opposition inside the Reagan campaign to taking George Bush as his running mate. So he was as surprised as anybody, and as a matter of fact, didn't even have time to change when there was a crush of press that showed up at his hotel room, and he was just in a red polo shirt and been drinking a Heineken, and the press shows up.
Well, the fact was that Ronald Reagan never really liked George Bush very much until then. They later became friends, but they certainly weren't at that
time. There were philosophical differences, there were cultural differences, there was a lot of political differences. Of course, he ran against Reagan for the nomination. So,
All right. Well, it's a fascinating book, Greg. Congratulations
Thanks,
on
Bob.
it.